We started listening to your station and everybody likes it.
It's awesome.
Yes.
It's awesome. We absolutely love it.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
And we're back to Israel we go. Very pleased that Zvika Klein joins us, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. And
good morning.
Good morning to you in Israel. And we appreciate you being here with us. You're a former Jewish world analyst. You're one of the top journalists specializing in Jewish diaspora affairs. I know you were in Paris in 2015. We walked around wearing a yarmulke 10 hours here. So
we started listening to your station and everybody likes it.
It's awesome.
Yes.
It's awesome. We absolutely
all right,
love
thank you for telling me. Anyway, we're glad that you're joining us. So first of all, welcome. And
thank you.
Tell us about the hostage release today. What transpired? How did it come across today compared to the last two times over the last 2 weeks?
Right. So first of all, thank you for having me on your show. Excited. So basically on Shabbat, on Saturday, there was a release of another 3 hostages, and as opposed to the one that took place on Thursday, it was a lot less, I would say, crazy, hysteric when it comes to Hamas. Basically on Thursday, if you recall, there were thousands of terrorists and members of Hamas surrounding these hostages, and we're talking about women, a woman and an elderly man who did not really do anything back at them, and there was really a very dramatic. Basically, the IDF and all the Israeli security forces spoke to the mediators and said, if this happens again, we cannot continue with the hostage deals. You are actually, there's actually life-threatening situations for our citizens, and we will not let this happen.
And Egypt and Qatar made sure that it didn't happen again. Perhaps you can share with our audience, and I'm getting a lot of questions about why is it so drawn out, 3 hostages, 1 day, 4 hostages? Why couldn't there be one big deal and you have all the hostages get released and you release the 1,000 terror? You're going to release them anyway. Let's do it all in one shot instead of drawing it out. And really, it's embarrassing.
I agree, by the way. In November 2023, it was like every evening, there was the same, it was kind of, unfortunately, I like to say like a reality show. And even actually back then, the production, quote unquote, the Hamas organized was even more kind of, lots more cameras and lighting and whatever. I think really this is something that Hamas requested, demanded, is the fact that they just want enough time, right? Whether it now there's trucks coming in with humanitarian support and food, and we obviously know, unfortunately, that most of it ends up in the hands of Hamas. They want the opportunity and the ability. There's one of the things in the deal is Israel isn't allowed to have any of its aircrafts go over Gaza between most of the hours of the day. So that allows them, in a sense, to kind of regroup, reposition themselves again, which is not something very positive on our behalf. And also, I think the idea is, definitely the idea for the stages is we're also releasing so many prisoners, who are terrorists. Many of them killed Israelis. So you don't want to have it all at once. You want to actually see that people are, taking it seriously and going according to it. I agree. Having it, every week, on Shabbat, having it happen is definitely not optimal.
You raise an interesting point. Is there any reason why the releases are on Shabbat? One on a Friday, Thursday, and they had one on Thursday. Why Shabbat?
It's not. I'm not totally clear about why it's on Shabbat. One thing I will say, I think it's because it was pretty much when they finally got to a deal. There's like you count a certain amount of days until something starts, and I guess that's when it fell out. And then according to that, the entire schedule was kind of planned. But interestingly, Agam Berger, who was released on Thursday, fascinating young woman in general. All the 5 observers from the IDF were really impressive. Supposedly, there were many reports saying she did not want to leave on Shabbat. And it's very interesting because her mother, at the same time, while she probably didn't even know it, her mother was saying, please don't film my daughter on Shabbat, because there were thoughts that she was going to be released the Shabbat before, and she was actually separated from her friends. And there were like talks about, should people actually go and cover it, or, and she really didn't want it to happen on Shabbat. So it could be a Gomberger asked for it not to be on Shabbat. And this is a young woman who's, I would say she's probably 19, maybe 20 maximum, who tried to keep kosher throughout the entire year and few months in captivity, kept Shabbat, kept Yom Kippur, and it wouldn't eat chametz on Pesach, when we know that most of the things they actually ate were pita bread. So she essentially probably was more starving even more than she was during the rest of the year. And I think that's something that's really impressive. And unfortunately, it kind of reminds us of other situations that our nation was in about 80 years ago.
Very impressive. And this young lady, and you're right, it reminds you of the Holocaust, where people made sacrifices to observe Sukkot or Passover or any of the holidays. And I always tell people is that as terrible as the Nazis were, it just seems Hamas is worse. If that's possible.
I mean, listen, it could be. I mean, I think we really don't know enough about what is going on and what happened in captivity. And as we saw in November, it really takes a long time until we understand what occurred, how it happened, what they went through. I think also just there's a really big kind of step that everyone's taking is not overwhelming the release hostages with information, because they missed so much. I mean, it really reminds us of October 7th, and that's a year and a few months ago. We've all experienced so much since then. So have they, but they haven't experienced it with us. So there's a situation where we don't want to overwhelm them, and then as time goes on, as we saw in the previous hostages who were released, more and more information comes out. And I think certain things where they maybe even thought were normal in a sense, because it was just like whether it's Stockholm syndrome of identifying with your captors, etc. There's certain elements you only realize when you look back. So I think when they look back, we'll actually be able to learn about the terrible things they went through.
Now, what is the reaction to the fact that it's a terrible deal, because you have terrorists with blood on their hands that are being let out, and they're going to try, they're going to automatically go right back to terrorism. Even Sinwar, who was released, was somebody who was advised the doctor advised the Israeli government, don't let him go, he's dangerous, and look what he did. So I know we want to get the hostages out, it's a priority. How does it balance out with the fact that these terrorists have the potential and the will to kill Jews again?
So I'm not gonna, I don't have a definite opinion to each direction. So I'll give you the explanations. First of all, yes, it's not a good deal, right? I think in general, deals are something where each side has to compromise. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't happen. You would think that after such a long time of us fighting in Gaza and having all these achievements, the numbers would change, but it didn't really change that dramatically between the Biden administration and the move over into the Trump administration. So in that sense, it's really not a good deal. Interestingly, if you compare this to other deals like the Shalit deal, where there were I think thousands of prisoners for one soldier. Here we're talking about substantially smaller number. Obviously, there's so many more hostages in captivity, and therefore the numbers will probably even out. But there's that situation, and also I think really there's so much pressure from within and from outside to just get this over with. And if there's one thing that Jews in general is is so important to us is really the aspect of pidyon shvuim and the aspect of life itself, which is something that we don't see anywhere else. Other countries will have citizens or soldiers who are hostage or in prison for so many years, and people are fighting for them, but I don't think it is that much of a sacrifice in order for that to happen.
Now, is there a movement in Israel to have the death penalty put back for terrorists? Because you have terrorists that are serving 4 or 5 life sentences, which is ridiculous. They're never going to live the amount that time. If there was a death penalty for those that killed Jews, wouldn't that make a difference?
So there were talks about it a few months ago. I haven't heard of it recently. I assume we'll hear about it again. And definitely, it's interesting how just recently we had, reports of, when it was 80 years for the liberation of Auschwitz, just last week, I think. There were all these reports and archive videos, photos, and documents from the Eichmann trial, who was really the first, I think, and one of the only people in Israel who received the death penalty. I think we'll see a lot more support for that type of a law than we would have seen before October 7th.
Because then you
Definitely
wouldn't
something
be
that could be.
dangerous terrorists, because those that would be released were not as big terrorists, so those with blood on their hands are no longer around. It would just make
Right. Even more, it was. I think it's interesting. Also, like one of the prisoners who was supposed to be released back to Gaza wouldn't leave. Which is fascinating. Like he wouldn't go. He wouldn't agree to go back.
I think there was 1 or 2 of them. Did they say why they wouldn't go back?
They wouldn't give the information, but obviously they just didn't want to be there for a number of reasons. And I'm sure the safety of their own lives and understanding how terrible it is there. Israeli jails, despite different reports about those who were actually more to the extreme and killed people on October 7th who have different situations, but the regular Israeli jails, allow them to have to get a college education. They study in the open university, like an online university. They have set meals. This is very different than jails, or definitely being a hostage in Gaza. So for some of them, it's not that terrible.
Tesky in Queens, you have a question or comment for our guests? Go ahead.
Yes, I understand when you're comparing it for 1,000 to 1, it's a much different deal. But they say the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing and expecting the same result. Now, it's bad enough to be 1,000 to 1 based on what happened with Sinwar afterwards. But that wasn't after a war. You would think this is what I don't understand. After a war where we took out their number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guy, we're sitting in the war there for what is it? Almost 16 months. With so many of our own dead, but we supposedly practically destroyed them. I thought the whole idea was not to have a deal like we're making an even trade. Basically, the idea was to force them to get back our captives without giving up any murderers. That was the whole point. I don't understand how that's, in a certain sense, this is almost the worst deal ever, because this is after a war, this kind of a deal, which we've never experienced in the past.
Good question.
Yeah. So I mean, I agree. It's not a good deal. It's a bad deal. I think one of the people that definitely has to explain it is Steve Witkoff and President Donald Trump, who actually really put a lot of pressure on Israel and on the other sides to make this happen, where it wasn't very different than what the Biden administration actually reached in May of last year. So, there's so many elements here, and I agree, it's a bad deal. I also do not understand why we were not able to get a better deal than that. And many Israelis are concerned about that situation. And the question really is also with Netanyahu now taking off to the US as we speak. President Trump really wants this Nobel Peace Prize. By the way, I think he should have got it for the Abraham Accords. And I hope he does succeed in getting peace or a certain element of stability. That said, how much of this is like an obsession to actually get the peace, and how much is Israel gonna have to pay for this to happen?
The ironic thing is, two points. First of all, since May, our position, I thought, has gotten much better because a lot of those people that we killed happened since then. Also, listen, I'm a big pro-Trump person, but it's not just a question of Trump like what he did in 2016. It's the people that he appointed for this government seem to indicate that he was going to follow in a similar path, because a lot of those same people are also very pro-Israel. So, but I try to be fair. I'm still pro-Trump, but it seems pretty clear that it's his doing, and a negative one of that, meaning how do you get a comparable deal to what Biden was going to give us when our position should be much better from May, when we're talking about a guy who's supposed to be much more pro-Israel? It just, something's missing over here. It doesn't seem to fit.
I will join into that question, and hopefully we'll get answers this week.
Anyway, Chesky, thank you for your phone call. We appreciate
All right,
it.
thank you very much.
But
Thank you.
it is a bad deal. But here's the thing, though. The president wants a deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia made it clear they want a Palestinian state. So the pressure is going to be on for Israel. Hamas won't be defeated. You can't really just eradicate them. They seem to have grown back. Whatever they lost, they've replenished with more terrorists that joined their ranks. But here you have a situation where if they're going to pursue the Saudi track aggressively, it means Israel will have to recognize a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria and in Gaza.
So I'll tell you what I've been hearing, and I've been hearing this for a number of years. What Saudi Arabia wants and would agree to is a roadmap, meaning Israel doesn't have to immediately recognize a Palestinian state. Yes, there needs to be some sort of a launch of some sort of roadmap of negotiations, of talks of how this should be, okay? And also, what is a Palestinian state? There could be so many types of quote unquote Palestinian states, in ways for them to govern, because I don't think anyone thinks that they're going to be a democracy or a non-corrupt, country. So Saudi Arabia is willing to, from what I understand, is willing to compromise on a lot less than that in order to have peace with Israel. And it's also in Israel's interest to have peace with Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's a very big deal, and it's a huge strategic asset, whether when it comes to Iran and also from economic points of view. It's the largest Muslim state in the world, and there could be so much positivity going on there.
Our guest, Zvika Klein, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. We're going to be right back. And if you'd like to chime in our conversation, 212-769-1925, 212-769-1925. Email is a wonderful way to get some of your questions answered. Zev@talklinenetwork.com, Zev@talklinenetwork.com. A program note, 1 week from tonight, among our guests, Rabbi Yeshua Balkany, Dean of the Beis Yaakov of Brooklyn. And of course, you can tune us in 24 hours a day. WNEW 102.7 FM HD3, America's only Jewish FM HD channel. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Stay tuned. This is the Talkline Network.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby? She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl? We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special. You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor? Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Marianne Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. This season, we hope you will consider supporting the work of Pro-Life Across America. We're non-political and totally educational. Your gift will help offer life-saving alternatives and pregnancy assistance to those in need. Visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org or like us on Facebook.
A baby's heart is beating 18 days from conception.
The world has noise. It's now the season of the major Super Bowl game.
Super Bowl Sunday is coming, and it's not a game, it's a feast. Score big with events by Hamish Gourmet. Their Super Bowl special feeds 8 to 10 people with a touchdown platter of chicken, hors d'oeuvres, buffalo wings, and coleslaw for just $249. Craving more? Choose from their mouth-watering touchdown platters with pulled beef nachos, deli wraps, and chicken fingers, or their kickoff trays with mild and spicy buffalo wings and crunchy chicken fingers. Don't get caught offside. Hamish has you covered with Frankenblanks, French fries, mini knishes, and halftime salads. To order, touch down at Hamish at 182 West Englewood Avenue in Teaneck, or call 201-644-5100. That's 201-644-5100 for delivery to the West Side, Bergen County, and Rockland. Hamish Gourmet will have you shouting touchdown all Super Bowl Sunday.
The World Jewish Expo is the place to be if you're a yeshiva, college day, a sleepaway camp, daycare, nursing home, college, hotel, nonprofit, and bungalow colony. You'll find unbeatable deals on everything from entertainment, banking, insurance, and kosher food to medical equipment. With over 260 vendors and 2,000 attendees, the 19th annual World Jewish Expo, incorporating the Camp Expo, is Sunday, February 16th at Meadowlands Expo Center. Crafted by seasoned event producer Charlotte. This isn't your average showcase. It's where quality vendors and attendees converge for transformative business exchanges. So call 718-633-0733. That's 718-633-0733. Or visit jewishexpos.com to reserve your spot today.
You don't have to be famous to have a memoir, a book that tells the story of your life. This is New York Times bestselling author Michael Levin, and books are my babies. Your children, grandchildren, and future generations can only know you if you put your story down on paper. That's why I created Jewish Leaders Books, a place where we can tell our stories for our loved ones and friends today and for future generations tomorrow. We're the people of the book. Now it's time for your book. Whether you have a dream or a complete draft, visit jewishleadersbooks.com or call Zev Brenner at 212-769-1925, extension 100, or Zev at talklinenetwork.com. That's jewishleadersbooks.com, or reach out to Zev at 212-769-1925, extension 100, or Zev at talklinenetwork.com.
Podcasts are everywhere, but cutting through the noise is tough. Did you know of the 5 million podcasts worldwide, half of them only get 30 listeners? Want to reach a bigger audience? Think radio. Talkline Network gets you targeted listeners who are ready to engage with your message. Host your own show with us and supercharge your podcast's reach. We'll help you connect with the right audience. For a free consultation, call Talkline Network today at 212-769-1925, extension 100. That's 212-769-1925, or email zevbrenner@gmail.com. That's 212-769-1925, extension 100.
Thank you for listening to this episode of
Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981. Please call us with your questions and comments at 212-769-1925. That's 212-769-1925. Or email us at zevbrenner@gmail.com.
And we're back. Our guest, Zvika Klein, the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. Zvika, what's going on with the Palestinian Authority? Because on one hand, you have those, including our good friend Giddy Greenstein, saying we have to recognize the Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza. There's nobody else. President Trump has floated a proposal of taking all the Gazans out and shipping them to Egypt, to Jordan. I don't think it's going to happen, but he seems to think that's a way to go. What do people in Israel see as what's going to be taking place, the next step in Gaza? Who's going to rule Gaza? Who's going to take care of it?
So it's a very big question, who's going to rule Gaza? And there are many, there are definitely talks about it, not enough, but really about how it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, at the moment, it really looks like Hamas, because it doesn't seem like there's any other alternative. And also the question really will be if President Trump is successful at actually getting Gazans to move temporarily or permanently to another country, whether it's Jordan or Egypt, or I think even Indonesia was one of the names raised. I think that's a very different situation to what it would be at the moment.
Is that practical? Because it sounds great. Listen, I think it would be wonderful if it can happen. I just don't see it happening. I don't see Egypt taking him. I don't see Jordan taking him. And Indonesia, maybe, but I'm not sure they're going to take 1.9 million Gazans into their country.
Right. First of all, I don't think it was everybody, and I think it's probably those who wanted to, or I don't know what. But I will say that if there's one thing that we can all agree with is, the one who's pushing this forward is President Trump. And even after yesterday, when the foreign ministers of these countries and other Muslim countries said, we are not going to allow this to happen, including Jordan and Egypt. Even afterwards, President Trump, sitting in the Oval Office, said out loud, this is going to happen, and they're going to have to make it happen. If he actually succeeds in something like that, that would be a very interesting, amazing, I don't know, something that no one would even imagine. And by the way, none of us would imagine the Abraham Accords happening. Even those who were in the know and visited the UAE, prior the Abraham Accords. The fact that all these countries were willing to have, diplomatic relations with Israel is a big deal. And now we look at it as a given, but it's not a given. The fact that they're still with Israel, or at least with diplomatic ties with Israel, after a year and a few months of war with Gaza, with Hamas, that's a huge deal.
Well, I think, listen, the fact that you have Iran, which has been taken down to a certain degree, you have Syria changing, even though I think Turkey is a major problem, but they're going to be the major influencer in Syria. But right now, things are moving in a positive direction. Hezbollah has also been defanged to a certain degree. I think some of these Arab countries are happy to see that.
100%. But, none of us would imagine it. And I think the fact that President Trump was able to do that when nobody thought it was possible. I remember even just moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. I was really sure, and many people also were sure that a war would break out just because of that. And nothing really happened. And it's just, now we're just used to saying that the American embassy is in Jerusalem, but no, that's a big deal.
Let's talk politics. How is the political mood? Who were the ones that would be with Bibi's party? Would he come back in power? Do people say Naftali Bennett could be the next prime minister? I know it changes probably with the day, but what's the mood in Israel?
It changes within the hour in Israel, I would say, probably. So yes, the political situation in Israel, as it always is, it's very, shaking around and changing as we speak. Naftali Bennett has always been really good at getting high ratings in the polls, not as much in the voting itself. In the past, he was at 18 or 20 seats according to polls, and at the end he actually became prime minister in some interesting way, but he only actually had like 6 or 7 seats in the Knesset. So I think we have to look at that very cautiously. I think if there's one thing that Israelis are just sick of, it's the current 120 Knesset members, and they want something different. One element I think that most of your listeners probably aren't as aware of is the fact that there's so many individuals and groups of people who are either establishing parties or looking into stepping into politics. Differently than America, let's say when in the Jewish community, you'll have your professional Jews who work in the organizations, and you'll have your lay leaders who are people volunteering, many of which well off. In Israel, that wasn't something that was part of the mentality as much. And I think definitely during the judicial reform, and then afterwards during the past war, so many people within business, etc., have become very involved in social activity and whether demonstrations or just I don't know, volunteering and making good things, helping the IDF, helping citizens without homes. So a lot of these people, and when you're a journalist, usually they come up to you and they say, we don't want you to write about it, but like we're speaking to you for background, or what do you think? There's so many people like that who are interested. So some of them are probably naive, but others may actually have a real shot at making some sort of a change. And it's interesting how sometimes people will vote for a candidate, not because they like them, because they can't stand the other one. So we could definitely be in that situation.
One of the names I hear bandied about, and we've had him on the program, is General Amir Aviv, who's
Avivi, yes.
Avivi, he was conservative, but I think even sponsored Jerusalem Post conference in New York and a Rocheva when he was in New York last year.
Right. So yeah, I mean, he won't say it out loud, whatever, but he's definitely going to either establish a party or join in to some sort of a political group of people. He's definitely very conservative when it comes to diplomatic and defense issues, but he doesn't wear a kippah. I don't think he considers himself either religious or definitely maybe traditional. So in that sense, I think when it comes to issues of religion and state, he may be thinking differently. So he's definitely one of those people. But he's actually one of those that it's kind of more clear. Many of them are really under the radar and not yet, talking about it or even showing relevance in the media.
I haven't asked him recently, but Danny Danon told me that he'd be interested in being prime minister. So I know he's back in New York, but he's a possible name too. There may be some. Who are other stars out there on the Israeli horizon that we may not be aware of in America, but are rising in the polls in Israel?
Well, anyone in the Likud will not. Most of them, let's say 99% of them, maybe except for Danny Danon, wouldn't nominate themselves until Netanyahu steps down, and we don't see him stepping down yet. Nir Barkat, former mayor of Jerusalem, minister at the moment, is definitely one of those people. Israel Katz is one of those people in the Likud, but they're like old timers. Obviously, not for prime minister, but there's the head of the Labor Party, Yair Golan, who's kind of positioning himself as the leader of the Israeli secular society, and he was one of the heroes of October 7th, fighting as a former general, fighting down south with a number of his former colleagues, but very anti-religious, very kind of forceful secular ideology. And there's a bunch of other people who just are not known, who are either in business or sold a big company. A lot of people in the tech industry are the ones actually who wanna be part, because such a big part of Israeli society is based on the tech industry, and a lot of them are very wealthy, sold very big companies, and they feel like they need their voice to be heard. And it's also, I think Bennett is kind of a similar situation where he was actually in tech and he sold a few companies. I don't think he was in tech as long as these people, but they definitely and Bennett as well see government as in a sense more similar to Donald Trump. It's not the traditional way of looking at it. They didn't grow up in this political world, and they manage companies. In the past, it was usually these generals from the IDF that were running the country. Definitely up until October 7th, that was kind of going down the drain. Things may be different now because Israel again is a country at war survival. But it's definitely, there's what to look forward to.
Is there perception that once the war is finished, that the Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu would resign like Golda Meir resigned, because no matter what, under his watch, this took place?
If I recall correctly, I think she actually didn't step down immediately. I think she actually went up for another election, and if I recall correctly, won that election, and then at a certain point afterwards stepped down. So that could definitely happen here as well. And I wouldn't be surprised that would happen again. because Netanyahu's base is very strong, though there are certain cracks in that political base that he has. And the question is, will there be an alternative? Because, as I said, most of the people in Likud won't run against Netanyahu. It's almost suicide. And also he's been very kind of prominent in not allowing these people around him to become strong. And every time they get a bit stronger, he sends them to New York or to Washington. So, that's also a problem, I would say.
Let's talk Haredim, because with the army, that's been a big issue. I know with the war, they needed more bodies to serve in the Israeli armed forces. What is happening with that?
So the whole issue with the Haredim is very dramatic. It's very concerning to a very large majority of Israeli society,
including to the national religious group.
In a sense, sometimes even more, because the amount of people in the national religious or religious Zionist community, not the Religious Zionist Party, have been in reserve, or have family members that were either killed or injured, at like hundreds of % more than their number in the population. So there's a situation where people who were maybe once more accepting towards the fact of people studying Torah in their institutions and by that supporting Israel, many of them have no patience anymore. Many families, had to function as a single parent family for a year, for half a year, for more than a year, and there's a huge toll over here, whether it between husbands and wives and relationships, regarding children, psychological issues, PTSD. Many people are dealing with businesses that were forced to close because they had to be there and not enough compensation from the government. So when they see this group of people who are not going into the IDF, they have just no more patience anymore. They say, we just need, and people who were asked to come back after being in it for such a long time say we can't, and they say, but we need you. There's no one else, and we can't let you go after X amount of time because we just don't have enough people. So that's really the situation here.
Is a compromise being worked out? Is something being done to try to get?
There is some sort of compromise. It's not something very very dramatic. There are lots of I would say holes in that compromise there. My sense is, I think many of the leadership in the Haredi community understand that this is a big deal and it needs to be dealt with. And we see different statements that are like hinting towards something, but not really saying it. And I think there needs to be someone with a bit of guts to stand up and say, we need this to happen. By the way, the IDF also has to understand that it has to, create a situation. Yeah, accommodate.
There was a story, you may have covered the story about some Chabad soldiers that wanted to go to the mikveh, and they were driven every day to the mikveh, and then they said they wouldn't let them go to the mikveh anymore, so they got transferred to another division.
I don't know about that story, but I've heard many stories, and I've certainly served also in the IDF, and I know there were different situations where I felt uncomfortable as a religious person. So I think definitely as someone who's Haredi, they would feel even more uncomfortable. But also I think there's a sense of pikuach nefesh. There really is, there's no other solution. But also, what happens if a terrorist comes to Bnei Brak or comes to Mea Shearim and there's no one to fight back? And we see so many situations where the ones that actually are able to neutralize a terrorist are citizens.
Eli Paley, he's the head of the Mishpacha magazine group. We had him on a number of months ago. He came up with a proposal that maybe at the age 25, Haredi men should serve Homeland Security. Maybe that would be a way to integrate. I thought it was an interesting idea. I don't think it went very far, but there has to be some ways of resolving this issue.
There needs to be, and there are many suggestions out there, but I think really the leadership of the Haredi community has to get that approved.
Anyway, I want to thank you for joining us, Zvika Klein, editor-in-chief. We hope you join us more often, and certainly have a good perspective of what's happening. And thank you for being part of our show.
Thank you so much. Shavuot tov.
Shavuot tov. Zvika Klein here on the Talkline Network. We're almost out of time. Coming up at 2 a.m., we're going to hear nothing.